This begins Topic 5, our overview of non-experimental research. So what is non-experimental research? Well, first, remember that a true experiment has two required components. There are two things that have to be present in order for it to be a true experiment. In other words, in order for it to determine that one factor causes another factor. And the first is a manipulation or treatment. The researcher must do something to the participants. And the second is random assignment. Participants are randomly assigned to one or more conditions. So that's what we have been working with. And now we're going to take a look at other types of studies that are not experiments or non-experiments. These cannot clearly establish causality the same way as an experiment, or in other words, their internal validity is weaker. First off, there's no manipulation or treatment. The researcher measures conditions as they occur naturally, either in a lab, like within a situation created by the researcher, or in the world. And there's no random assignment. Since there's no treatment or manipulation, there's no random assignment. So the goals of non-experimental research, therefore, are not to determine a cause. So you'll remember the three goals of research: to describe, explain, or predict. So if your goal is to explain or to show that A causes B, then an experiment is the best way. But if your goal is to describe, just to describe what's going on, then a non-experimental approach is appropriate. And if your goal is to predict an outcome, a non-experimental approach is appropriate. And sometimes we have multiple goals and we can rely on multi-method approaches, which we'll talk about later. And that's just using experimental and non-experimental approaches in combination. So there is some terminology that will be different. So we aren't going to use the terms independent and dependent variable in most studies like this. Instead, we might use different terms. You'll see a little bit of this mixed, but typically independent and dependent variable are reserved for experiments. So for this kind of work, we might say the variable of interest in a descriptive study, or we might use predictor variable and outcome variable. So look for a little bit different language in these studies. The reason is that we're not manipulating anything. So there's no independent variable, which is what the manipulation is. And because we're not manipulating anything, we can't assume a causal relationship. We can't say one variable depends on another. So here we don't have a dependent variable. So when should you use non-experimental research? Well, when you have just one variable. There's no independent variable, but just variables of interest that we wish to measure and learn more about. Or if we're interested in a correlation, we're not really interested in whether one thing causes another, but just whether the two variables are related. We might do non-experimental research in a causal comparative study. That is, we have a question about a cause, but we can't manipulate or randomly assign the independent variable. We'll look at some reasons for that when we come to that section. And this is a type of quasi-experimental study which we'll be covering next week. And finally, we might just be interested in exploring. So when we're simply seeking to understand a particular experience or phenomenon by finding out about people's lived experience. And this is a good way to get started on a line of research, especially if there's a new phenomenon that seems to be occurring that we just don't know much about. It might be best to do an exploratory study to learn where to start on designing other types of studies. So, first example of these four that we just mentioned, a single variable design. You already looked at the video of Lost in a Mall. So you'll be familiar with this study by Loftus and Pickrell, who found that 25% of individuals who were told a false memory believed the memory and elaborated on the details of the false event. Now, that means 75% didn't believe the memory. But nevertheless, 25% is quite a lot. And this is a single variable design because there wasn't a manipulation. That is, everyone who participated experienced the same stimuli. Everyone was told 3 real memories and 1 false memory that ostensibly occurred when they were 4 to 6 years of age. So the experimenter did not change anything for any of the participants. So this is a single variable design. Example 2, the second of the type we talked about, is a correlational design. And the example that we have is a correlational study of the relationship between sense of humor and positive psychological capacities. This study looks at, we'll read the abstract, the constructs of sense of humor and positive psychological capacities have been heralded as important phenomena within the growing field of positive psychology, especially within the organizational sciences. Additionally, a sense of humor has been found to relate to positive affective experiences. So they're now, in that first part, they're establishing the importance of the study, saying it matters. Leaders can develop followers' confidence, hope, optimism, and resiliency for what Avolo and Luthans called sustainable veritable performance. Now they're making a point that this even seems to impact performance. So now this study, beginning with the hypothesis presented and tested here will advance the theoretical and empirical discussion of leadership in organizations by linking several emerging constructs of interest, both in academe and practice. This study marks an initial step in the study of linkages between one's sense of humor and positive psychological capacities. The key word here is linkages. So they're not trying to say that one causes the other. They're not saying a sense of humor causes you to have positive psychological capacities, and they're not saying the reverse either. They're just saying these two seem to be linked or related. And later on, we'll know a little more about what these correlation coefficients are about. The next example is of what we mentioned a couple slides ago, causal comparative designs. So this is a type of study that was interested in gender and wondering whether dating success of Korean adoptees, children who were Korean but were adopted in the West. So how successful are they at dating, and does it make a difference if they're male or female? So reading the abstract, overseas adoption from South Korea is a widespread phenomenon in the West. Adoption studies have focused on early development and post-adoption adjustment during childhood and socioeconomic success during adulthood. However, few studies deal with dating experiences and marital success of Korean adoptees. While those aspects are a key factor in determining subjective well-being and socioculture integration. So I think you understood so far. They're saying lots of studies have looked at how economically successful these adoptees are, but what about the dating experience, which relates to overall well-being? Several studies and popular media highlight the status inferiority of Asian males compared to Asian females in the heterosexual Western courtship system. We therefore hypothesize that male Korean adoptees have more difficulties finding a partner than their female counterparts. Using a dataset stemming from a survey conducted among 290 adult adoptees living in the West, we indeed found that, after controlling for the effective age and current income, males expressed more difficulty in finding a partner and were more likely to be single than their female peers in their adoptive Western country. This gender disparity may have implications for policymakers who are concerned with general well-being of transracial adoptees and Asian minorities in the West. So, in a nutshell, they were comparing gender. They were looking at relationship success, comparing males and females. But they couldn't randomly assign people to be male or female. People are born that way, and so they had to just compare males and females. So this is a quasi-experiment of a causal comparative design. They're just comparing the two groups and then inferring a cause, that the gender is causing the outcome. Our fourth example is an exploratory design, and the title is a qualitative exploratory case study of self-reported influences affecting the decision of homeless sexual minority students to leave home. Qualitative, we'll talk about this later, simply means that it's based on words and not numbers. Exploratory means they're looking to get information on a topic that there just isn't that much information about. People identifying as sexual minority is a phenomenon that's been increasing recently. And so it's something that's worth exploring that we don't have enough information about. So reading the abstract, this study was designed to identify commonalities regarding influences within the decision-making process that attributed to sexual minority students voluntarily or involuntarily becoming homeless, in lieu of remaining with their respective familial home. Important topic, people choosing homelessness over staying with their families. An exploratory case study research design was utilized to determine common themes present in the self-described events that led up to the respective decisions of 3 volunteer participants, who identified themselves as sexual minority youths at the time of transition to leave home. Results of this study discerned 5 commonalities among the participants' experiences, which influenced their experiencing homelessness. The detection of these commonalities may provide school administrators and other professionals, both within and outside of the public school system, with guidance on the creation of interventions designed to mitigate the impact of these factors, decreasing the potentiality of this demographic becoming homeless and thus being subjected to the detrimental ramifications inherent within such a circumstance. So they're just exploring. They only had 3 people in their sample, and they were talking to these people to learn more about it so that we can study it further or begin to make decisions. So internal validity or the robustness of the design to determine causality, it differs for non-experimental designs. So as we know, it's highest, if we look here on this chart, it's highest for experiments because they're eliminating as many confounds as possible. Quasi-experiments, of which the causal comparative framework we just looked at was one, and that was the study where the Korean people's relationship success was compared by whether they're male or female. Those designs can vary. There are things that can make a quasi-experimental design stronger. And the weakest designs are correlational, which we'll look at the reasons for that in a little bit. But we can't tell what direction. We can't tell whether one variable predicts the other or whether the latter variable predicts the former. And that's a challenge with correlational designs. So in summary, non-experimental designs include many designs, but the ones we're talking about are single variable designs, correlational designs, causal comparative designs, and exploratory designs. These may be intentionally selected because this type of design is most appropriate for the research purpose that is descriptive or predictive, or it might be necessary, there's no choice, due to impossibility or impracticability of random assignment or counterbalancing. Because of this, they have low internal validity.